Hello, everyone. This is a continuation of British Literature 303. Today's lecture is regarding Mary Astell, some reflections upon marriage. This is a reading that fits in the transition between the political tracts that we read earlier in this semester, Locke, Hobbes, and others, and the fictional work that it will follow. This is part of the pamphlet period. Joseph Addison, The Spectator, Jonathan Swift in A Modest Proposal. And although this text actually is written in 1700, several years before the Addison and Swift, indeed actually full 20-something years before A Modest Proposal and Gulliver's Travels, it is part of the period of Enlightenment texts, as I will emphasize today. I'm actually going to use a PowerPoint today for this 10-15 minute lecture regarding Mary Astell. Actually, probably longer than that, probably close to 20 minutes. Mary Astell is an highly unusual figure. For one, she's obviously a woman and in a period dominated by men. Second, she is someone who is not she has no official capacity and is not someone with a rigorous education. As a woman, she received almost no education. She, in terms, is an autodidact, someone who is self-educated. She also leaves almost no record behind her. Her entire printed biography can be put in almost one line. You can see it on Wikipedia. She lived, she wrote, she died, she never married. And she was supported in her adult life as a 40-something and onwards until her death by a series of influential women who understood her innate brilliance. Mary Astell is best known for two tracts, two long essays that she writes, some reflections upon marriage in 1700, and actually some years before this, she wrote the first part of another essay that she completed actually after this one, which is the title of which is escaping me at the moment, but it is regarding education of women, towards the education of women that she saw as the crucial mission of her life. This text is one that I'm going to situate not only because it is of interest to all of us who meditate upon marriage, who reflect upon marriage some 300-something years after Astell's writing, but also because it is a perfect bridge between the Enlightenment philosophical texts regarding the social sphere, the public order, the structure of society, and the Commonwealth itself, the polity that we talked about with Locke and Hobbes, and also animates other thinkers, and the private sphere, from the social to the personal. And what better entity to express that than marriage itself? Marriage is a covenant, a bond between two people, something that is ostensibly, apparently personal, but it is a legal creation, and it allows a private relationship to take public shape, to have public standing. It is in itself a kind of transitional aspect. Now, Astell, a religious woman, a deeply religious woman, she was someone who opposed who was a strong Restoration figure. Again, this text is in 1700, so it's at that bridge also between the Restoration and the period that follows it. We call it Augustine, but it has many names. The Age of Pope, a figure that we are omitting from our study, but is the dominant, Alexander Pope, the dominant literary figure of this time. And so there's a great deal that is symbolic in her writing here. She is trying to retain the traditional, she's a strong traditionalist, she's what's called a Tory, a conservative, a traditional approach to marriage, but one that is appropriate for her principles of enlightenment, reason, and rationality. So between the social and the private, applying reason, wisdom, rational thought, the Enlightenment principles to the individual. That is crucial. And with that in mind, it serves as a useful text to be aware of, to look at, not only because of the content is of interest to many of us at that stage of life, many of you, but also because it takes these political ideas and then applies it to the individual, which is the crucial step on the road to Daniel Defoe's Robinson Crusoe, to Samuel Richardson's Pamela, the early novels that focus, of course, on the individual, but the individual, the personal, the ordinary private sphere as reflective of larger values. So we'll look at the frontispiece, the title page of this text. I hope you can see it here. Move myself out of the way, and then I'll talk a bit more about how I see it, and then we'll look at I'll talk briefly about the general argument of this essay, and then a few short passages. Reflections upon Marriage. This is the third edition. It's published already in 1706. It was relatively widely read, as you can note, similar with a model proposal many years later. Gulliver's Travels 26 years later, and then Robinson Crusoe also, which we'll talk about forthwith, immediately, 19 years later. There is no author's name added here. Here, a preface is added. This is a subsequent edition in answer to some objections. Often these prefaces that were added to subsequent editions are really worth reading. They allow the author to take a second stab or to embellish on points that were raised in conversations after the initial publication. Let's look at what it says here below. What is the topic of this text? Well, it's fairly clear, Reflections upon Marriage, but here already the author is staking her claim. If a virgin marry, she, remember this letter that looks like an F is an S. If a virgin marry, she has not sinned. Nevertheless, such shall have trouble. This is a quote from Corinthians, from the New Testament. If a virgin marries, she has not sinned. Nevertheless, she shall have trouble. Now she's using this religious text, this ancient scriptural Christian text, to make a point that even if you marry and if you follow all the rules as a virgin, it is not a sin, but it nonetheless brings great trouble. Astell's purpose in this text, its general plan, is to improve the state of marriage, both for men and for women. How can marriage be ameliorated? How can it be improved into the social structure, the public entity that serves the individuals and also serves society and serves its participants, husbands and wives. Of course, that's the only way she can have envisioned it, that it can maintain its religious structure, social legal structure, and yet also reflect the values of time. She's going to talk in this text, and here I just want to bring your attention to the other side of the slide, talk about individual liberty and slavery in the context of a marriage. She will attempt to apply Enlightenment ideas about equality and education and how they might, in personal relations, how they might animate, how they might inform a private relationship such as marriage between a man and a woman. She will, she will also talk about what is natural, what is constructive, what is natural and what is social, what is artificial, and what is, to remind God, divinely decreed, what is the natural state of affairs. And in that context, it's important that we do read at least one woman here to note that social hierarchies about superiority and inferiority, about God and man, are often one that we see as constructed, but people of the time might have seen as the natural state of affairs, the natural subjugation of woman. But she talks about, that's a quote from the text, the natural subjection, that women are naturally inferior. Why so? We'll need to look inside. This is the start of this preface added 6 years after the initial publication, but it's worth looking at. These reflections being made in the country where the book has occasioned them came but late to hand. The reader I'm helping you read this also because it's a skill that you can have as English majors. Let's keep going. The reader is, and although the language is old and even the printing is old, this is the original printing held by the British Library. And it's worth having this kind of exercise for you. I'm sorry that my cursor seems to have disappeared. The reader is desired to execute their unreasonableness as well as other faults, and to believe that they have no other design, maybe it's unseasonableness, and to believe that they have no other design than to correct some abuses, which are not the less because power and prescription seem to authorize them. Okay, she's going to defend herself. That's what these subsequent edition prefaces try to do, and they still do in our time, by the way. If any is so needlessly curious as to inquire from what hand they can, if anybody wants to know who wrote this, they may please know that it is not good manners to ask. Don't ask. You don't need to know who wrote this. It's not even evident that a woman or a man wrote this. We are all of us sufficiently vain. The title page doesn't tell them, and we are all sufficiently vain. Without doubt, the celebrated name of the author, which most are so fond of, has not been avoided, but for very good reasons. I have a reason for not telling you who wrote this. To name one, who will care to pull upon themselves an hornet's nest? Who wants all these people bothering me, annoying me? It's a very great fault to regard, rather, who it is that speaks than what is spoken. What matters is not the personality, the character of the writer, the identity of the author, but what is spoken. If you are an intelligent reader, you will note the content. You will focus on what is said rather than who is saying it. And either to submit to authority when he should only yield to reason. Here she is announcing herself as a clear, enlightened figure, to submit to no other authority. It doesn't matter if a noble person wrote this, Astell was not, or if a poor person wrote this, Astell was not. She was a middle upper class woman with uncommon intelligence and bravery, boldness to write this and to read her own work, or if reason, and so what matters is who to yield only to reason. The only authority should be reason, rationality, good judgment. Or if reason press too hard, to think to ward it off by personal objections and reflections. The only reason bold truth may pass while the speaker is incognito. I can share these bold truths only because I'm incognito, I am hidden, I'm not telling you who I am. And what matters is not my identity, but rather the content of what I'm saying. You can attack me for what I'm saying, but don't attack me for who I am. The custom has put women. Here's a subsequent. This is not the next paragraph. Custom has put women, generally speaking, into a state of subjection. Custom of the world. All right? So she's not saying it's natural, but the right can no be more proved from the fact than that the predominancy of vice can justify it. A certain great man has endeavored to prove by reasons not contented that the original state of things to women was the superior. Why are women held to be inferior? It might have been the reverse earlier on. Some natural philosopher, some actually says great man, has tried to prove through reason that woman used to be superior, and that the subjection to men, the inferiority of woman, is an effect of the fall. This is part of the original sin, the fall in the Garden of Eden, which of course they're taken to be as sort of a natural fact, the punishment of her sin. And that some believe, this Mr. Whiston, that before the fall there was a greater equality between the sexes. And this is an account that actually is very interesting in the history of sexuality and gender studies, that societies move through different levels of equality. And in fact, in the European view, greater equality might have been a sign of primitiveness. Okay, not a sign of advancement or sophistication. However this be, 'tis certainly no arrogance in a woman to conclude that she was made for the service of God, and this is her end. She, as a strong Christian, firmly believes that no doubt regarding inferiority or equality, women are, like men, made for the service of God. If mankind, I'm now in the bottom section on the bottom, for me it's the bottom right of my page, if mankind had never sinned, reason would always have been obeyed. Not only is she is citing, she's not saying whether she agrees or not, the author is not saying that, but not only are women perhaps inferior as a consequence of the fall, but reason itself might be betrayed because of the fall as well. If mankind had never sinned, reason would always have been obeyed. Our culpability has brought a kind of betrayal of reason, disobeying reason. there would have been no struggle for dominion, and brutal power would not have prevailed. We would not be liable to use brute power as a proxy, a replacement for reason. We would have remained committed to reason as a way of resolving disputes, if not for the fall. This too is part of our lapsed state of society. Now men will be guided, not guided by their reason, but by their appetites, our desires, our force, our power, and do what they ought, but what they can. People don't do what they ought to do. They're not guided by judgment, by reason, not guided by right thinking, what they ought to do, but what they can. The reason, or that which stands for it, the will and pleasure of the governor, is to be the reason of the host who will not be guided by their own. People who want, who have desires, who have power, will replace their judgment, their desires, what's good for them, the rich, the powerful, the royal, will replace, they will decide for everyone else, for those who will not be guided by their own. Again, reason is a difficult, is a high bar. Okay, so, and here she's making her last claim at the bottom of this page here, in this last section. I just want to say this is a point. Nor can it be any society, great or little, from empires down to private families, without a last resort to determine the affairs of that society by an irresistible sentence. And this is not only true of society at large, that reason has been abandoned and replaced by power and brute force, appetites, desire, sexual, economic, financial, and raw power for its own sake. But this is not only in states and societies, but also in individual families. Sense over strength. She wants to advocate for a return to putting reason in its proper place as the organizing principle, as the faculty that helps us understand, that helps us make our decisions of what kind of relationships, what kind of social structures, and what kind of marriage. She's asking, what is a rational marriage? If we accept these principles of judgment, of enlightenment, of good, clear thought, of reason and sense, what then should a marriage look like? What is, and she says, a rational marriage? Now, she's not so bold, she's not so, although she is in some ways she's sometimes said to be sort of the first English feminist, proto-feminist. She's still deeply religious. She's not someone who thinks that women should have full equality. Women are fallible as well. They have their faults. And she's going to say on this page that a woman indeed, I'm sorry, the cursor's not working. I wish I had some way of resolving this. I don't seem to have one though. But a woman indeed can't properly be said to choose. All that is allowed her is to refuse or accept what is offered. It's about 5 lines down in the quotation. Woman can't be said to choose. Of course, she's not so crazy to think that a woman can choose whom to marry, but it is allowed her to refuse or accept what is offered. She should have a right of judging, of either accepting or refusing her suitor. Astell personally, by the way, did have, I don't know if this is relevant at all, but she did have a suitor, a serious suitor, but it broke down and she never got married. When we have made such reasonable allowances are due to the sex, perhaps they may not appear too much in fault as one would at first imagine, and a generous spirit will find more occasion to pity than to reprove. Are women treated as inferior by design or by a corruption of reason? All right. No reason can resist, and all they must do be exemplary. Thank you. I don't know why it just came back. She was, here it is, her other work, a serious proposal, that's what it's called. In order for women to be able to choose rationally, to make a proper choice about marriage, they had to be endowed with the same faculties of reason, the same powers of reason, right thought, clear minds, that was made available to men. And her larger mission was not changing the state of marriage. That was sort of followed from her other purpose, her main purpose, which is, as she wrote in this pamphlet, which is an essay, which has 2 parts, for which she is better known, a serious proposal to the ladies. That's the topic. A serious, not a modest proposal. Here we have a serious proposal, but you can see clearly how it's from the same genre of political pamphleteering. And in a serious proposal to the ladies, also written by Mary Astell, and you can see the topic below from the title page, in the first printing, of the mutual relation between ignorance and vice and knowledge and purity. If we expect women to have command of vice and purity, these traditional values foisted upon women, imposed on them, they must also have a knowledge of, they also cannot be left in ignorance. Knowledge will abet purity. This is a serious proposal to the ladies for educating women. Specifically, she actually was educating women in a all-women context, not with men, but she wanted to create academic colleges for women alone. A very radical idea at the time, one that was lampooned by many, including by Jonathan Swift, but she strongly believed this and she certainly had its supporters. It's a visionary tract. One quick section. This is not from a serious proposal. This is back, the quote that I've pasted in is from our text. It's from Some Reflections Upon Marriage, but this is where it makes evidence. This is halfway through the essay of Some Reflections Upon Marriage, in which she makes evident her emphasis, how crucial she sees education as allowing women also in their private lives, in their marriages, to fulfill their function. How can a man respect his wife when he has a contemptible opinion of her and her sex? When from his own elevation he looks down on them. Man might or might not be naturally superior to woman because of the fall, because of the Christian sin in Garden of Eden, or perhaps because of nature, but they can't help it. A gentleman, a man of her class, can't help but look down on a woman when he looks down on them as void of understanding and full of ignorance and passion. So that folly and women are equivalent terms with them. They don't know anything, and so they spend all their time doing frivolous things. Can he think that there is any gratitude due to her utmost services? He exacts a strict duty, and so he asks her to do what she needs to do, not because she understands it, but out of simple duty. Because she was made to be a slave to his will. An ignorant person is a person who is lower, and she will be a slave to his will. And he has no higher end and she has no higher end than to serve and obey him. How then can he possibly respect her? Perhaps we arrogate too much to ourselves when we say this material world has made for our sakes, that its glorious maker has given us this use of its certain. But when we suppose that over which we have dominion to be made purely for our sakes, we draw a false conclusion. This to me is a radical claim. She's saying that the natural world, we might err when we think that the natural world, when all that is in it, including other people, might be for our own purposes. Other people, other beings, resources, nature itself, as he who should say, the people were made for the prince who was sent over them, who'd be thought to be out of their senses as well as politics. She's taking those political ideas about natural rights. And she indeed thinks that enlightenment, that thought, education is a natural right. And saying, when we deny that right for purely constructed artificial reasons, doesn't serve us, people like power, we necessarily will condescend, we'll look down upon. We are actually taking power that doesn't belong to us. We are arrogating power that is not ours, that God gave to other beings on their own. You noted that word of slavery. I hope you did, because she was made to be a slave to his will. Let's conclude this section of Astell, this directed, focused reading of Astell, with some reading about slavery. Slavery, of course, is going to become one of the dominant discourses in English, Anglo, and then American literature. Is slavery natural or is it not? Are the races, are different class of people, the genders, equal or not? Is slavery the actual state of affairs? Here is the same text, both pasted in and in the printing, the 1706 printing. And she sees a kind of insidious slavery, kind of corrupting slavery, destroying marriages from within. And she uses the same terms that we saw in Hobbes, the mock of the sovereign, the Leviathan as Hobbes called it, and the man as the sovereign in the home. And what then is the standing of woman? So 2 more passages, I believe, and then we'll be done. Woman, it's true, ought to be treated with civility, for since a little ceremony and outside respect is all their guard, all the privilege that showed them, that's allowed them, it were barbarous to deprive them of it. They ought to be treated with civility. And because I would treat them civilly, I would not express my civility at the usual rate. What is the current state of affairs is not enough. I wouldn't allow it. I would not, under pretense of honoring and paying a mighty deference to ladies, call them fools to their faces. What are all the fine speeches and submissions that are made, but in abusing them in a well-bred way? I would not call them fools by flattering women. I would not call them fools by insulting them. She must be a fool with a witness who can believe a man, proud and vain as he is, will lay his own authority, the dignity and prerogative of his sex, one moment of it at his feet, but in prospect of taking it up again to more advantage. He may call himself her slave a few days, but it is only in order to make her his all the rest of his life. Here she's talking about courtship and dating, that men will try to fool women, and it is an insult by flattering them, by pretending to be their slaves for a few days, pretending to be inferior to, oh, you are so fair, so kind, so pure, so beautiful. But women, if they were educated, would see right through this. That flattery is an attempt to lay down their authority for a few days, to become slave to the woman, to the desired. And she had said earlier in the pamphlet, that it could be because of beauty, it could be because of the woman's wit, the way they speak, or because of their money, their coin. He may call himself men in their courtship, may call himself women as slaves for a few days, but it's really only to enslave women for the rest of their lives. As men would have little reason to expect happiness when they marry only, this is a few pages later, when men have little reason to expect happiness when they marry only for the love of money, wit, or beauty, the 3 reasons that men often marry, or they're seeking this particular woman. This is what she was suspicious of men. As has already been shown, so much less can a woman expect a tolerable life when she goes upon these considerations. How can a marriage be a happy one when it is based upon these artificial, transient values? Love of money, wit, or beauty, rather than love of each other, love of people, or love of wisdom and rationality. Let the business be carried as prudently as it can be on the woman's side, as smartly, as intelligently, prudently as the woman's side. A reasonable man can't deny that she has by much the harder bargain. She's got the harder side because she puts herself entirely into her husband's power. The social contract is not that different from the marriage contract. How can this work? The woman is putting herself under the sovereignty, the power of the man. And if the matrimonial yoke, here in the private sphere, akin to the social contract of government, if it be one of tyranny, right? The husband is kind of a tyrant. Neither law nor custom affords her that redress which a man obtains. She has no way of getting out. She couldn't imagine divorce, right? There is no way out. The man has a way to control it, but the woman has not. He who has sovereign power, the man, the husband, has sovereign power, does not value the provocations of rebellious spirit. He doesn't care if she is not happy, but he knows how to subdue him with ease. A ruler who doesn't care about his subjects can do anything. There is no redress for even a rebellious subject or rebellious wife, and will make himself obeyed. The husband will make himself be obeyed. But patience and submissions are the only comforts that are left to a poor people who groan under tyranny, unless they are strong enough to break the yoke, to depose and abdicate, which I doubt would not be allowed of here. She's making a clear parallel between society, the public organization of the state, and the private organization of individuals, marriages, relationships. That is going to be key in how we envision 50 years after this text, marriage plots, novels about love, novels about marriage, the crucial topic of many early texts that we'll be reading in several weeks' time. For whatever may be said against passive obedience in other case, I suppose there's no man that likes it very well in this. How much soever arbitrary power may be disliked on a throne, not Milton himself would have cried up liberty to pure female slaves or plead for the lawfulness of resisting a private tyranny. Even the Republicans, the people like Milton, the revolutionaries of her parents' and grandparents' generations from 40, 50, 60 years before her, who were advocating for overthrowing, for rebelling against the throne, and in the face of a cruel, arbitrary ruler. Even Milton, even the strongest revolutionaries would not have said that women, female slaves, should have the same recourse. That they similarly were lawfully permitted to rebel against the private tyranny. Tyranny of political abuse of power in the private life, in the private sphere. Okay. What is the answer to all this? Wise leadership and enlightened and submission. That women should still submit, but it should be based on reason. Astell's Christian view of a proto-feminist, this is not your 1970s or 20th century or contemporary day, 21st century feminism, but is the first stepping stone on that way. She then who marries ought to do it, ought to do so, ought to lay down her freedom for an indisputable maxim that her husband must govern absolutely and entirely. Husband is still entirely in charge. She has nothing else to do but to please and obey. But she must not attempt to divide his authority so much as dispute it. To struggle with her yoke will only make it gall them more, but must believe him wise and good. It has to be enlightened leadership, enlightened superiority. A husband must do so with respect. She who can't do this in no way is fit to be a wife. She may set up for that peculiar, she may set up that peculiar, an ancient fathers talked of, but is not qualified to receive that great order. She might go to the marriage altar, but she should not do so with good judgment, unless she is sure that her husband, the sovereign in her relationship, will attend the eminent exercise of humility and self-denial, patience and resignation, the duties that his wife is called to. Okay, stop the share. And that will do it for this. I'm sorry that, let's see if I can get out of this. My computer is frozen, so I can't even stop the, let's see if I can do this. Good. Okay, so sorry for the last, for these extra few seconds at the end, but that will do it for this class. Okay.